So I think our choice here on topics was approaches to achieving decarbonization goals, but with a bit of a twist. So I want to talk about decarbonization, but in the context of resiliency, because we have to invest in both aspects in the energy transition that we're facing today. In fact, it's a great time to be an American because we are moving forward in terms of our commitment as a country to the Global Compact on decarbonization. We are seeing record numbers of commercial, industrial, and even utilities enterprises who are making commitments to decarbonization and clean energy and sustainability. And by the way, we've got a lot of stimulus funding that will be entering the market. Gridwise Alliance is, of course, seeking to influence the direction of some of these incentives that are coming out, so we're very much a part of those conversations. And, you know, one of the things that is pretty exciting for me is not only these investments in our energy grid and our infrastructure and transportation, in commercial and industrial buildings and energy use in those buildings, but it's also interesting to talk about the resiliency of these investments too. And I want to talk about that because so far, if you look at the statistics from NOAA, this year up through at least early October, we've had $18 billion climate and weather impacted disasters in this country. The average for the last 5 years is 16 such disasters. We're already above the average for the year. So at the same time we're addressing the climate change aspects and decarbonization, we also have to address the resiliency of our energy systems, again, be it on the grid, commercial enterprises, or in transportation. And so I want to make sure that we don't think of these as two disparate topics between decarbonization and resiliency, that we think about the interdependency of these two topics. And so I couldn't think of a better panel to bring together today with two of the gentlemen here in person with us and with Alex Saltikoff, who is connected to us virtually today. These three professionals were each my first choice for this panel, and I'm very happy that they accepted. And we're looking forward to a great and engaging conversation. So we're going to start out by first giving them a chance to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their companies themselves and the commitments they've made, and then we're going to get into a handful of questions. But I do want to leave a few minutes towards the end because I do recognize, first of all, after this session we have lunch. So I don't want to stand between all of you and lunch. But at the same time, we'd love to get a couple of questions from the audience, and we'll take the opportunity to do so and leave some time for that. So with that, I want to start with Jay Oliver, immediately to my left here, Managing Director of Grid Systems Integration at Duke Energy. Duke Energy, if you're not aware, is one of the oldest and one of the largest energy companies in the country, and certainly has made some significant investments and will continue to make investments on both of these topics and the convergence of these two topics. Jay and I have had the pleasure of working together. We're both very young men, but we've worked together for the better part of 4 decades. And so we know each other, we know each other's golf capabilities and so forth. So I'm very happy that he's joined us today. So we're going to kick off with Jay. We're going to move to Alex Saltikoff next, and then Eric will bring us back to from a technology and a supplier perspective. So Jay, let's start out with yourself.
All right, that sounds good. Assuming y'all can hear me okay. I do have a slide or two. If those are available, I can certainly wing it if they're not. But my name's Jay Oliver. I am with Duke Energy. Anytime I get the opportunity to talk about the green energy transition, I try and take it because it's something that we're passionate about, especially when I talk about it in relation to what we do at Duke Energy. So I appreciate Rob inviting me to come talk today. And the stats up on the screen will show Duke is a large company. We have 8 million electric customers across multiple states, 6 states. We have about 1.5 million natural gas customers. Suffice it to say, we have experience in what it takes to manage the grid, what it takes to manage renewables, what it takes to manage multiple sources. And one of the most important things about the green energy transition, which doesn't get talked about a lot, is system balancing. How do you balance supply and demand? That's one of the most important things we've got to be excellent at as we make this transition. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll kind of lay out the way that I think about it. And what I do at Duke Energy, I've got a few different teams. I have the battery storage development team. I have the demand side management team, demand response team. Duke has over 1 million customers on demand response. We're the largest program in the country for demand response. I have the clean energy program team. I have the transportation electrification team. And I have small telecom strategy group as it relates to integrating grid systems together. So these things all do really work together. And when I think about the transition, here are some of the things you face. Fossil fleet transition. Why is that important? What's so unique about fossil fuel that made it relatively straightforward for us? It's what we call a load following resource. In other words, it burns more fuel when you plug something in the wall, and it burns less when you unplug it, generally automatically. So matching supply and demand with a load following resources, think like pressing the gas pedal down in your car, a little faster, a little slower, relatively straightforward to do. As we begin to transition away from that, balancing supply and demand becomes harder. Now, I'm not saying we can't do it, because we will, but it's a little more challenging. Now let's get into electrification. At the same time that we are reducing our load following resources, generally fossil fuel, we've got a significant electrification movement underway. I don't know that everybody in the room really understands what this means when large fleets like Amazon, UPS, FedEx, et cetera, electrify at a single location. This is a big, big deal, and it's going to take quite a bit of work for us. So load growing significantly at the same time that we're changing how we generate power. Now, the middle one, growth in clean energy resources, this is good. And what I mean here is it's dispersed. So we now have, instead of 25 locations, we may have 25,000 locations that come into the grid. So two-way power flow becomes very, very important for us. But managing that is much more challenging than managing supply and demand on the bulk electric system the way we do it today. So that's something we need to be cognizant of. Again, all happening at the same time. Now, we heard a couple other speakers talk about this. We talk about there's more activity when it comes to storms today. I can testify to that. I work in a utility in hurricane-prone areas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. I go to storm duty when it happens. I'm out in the field helping to lead crews to get the lights back on. The picture on that screen is real. That's a flooded substation in one of our territories. I think we had, I'm not going to get this right, but 2 300-year floods within 5 years, for example, in one of our territories. So we need to change the way that we deal with that when it comes to hardening the grid against storm damage. And again, that's even more important now that you consider we have multiple sources. And then finally, customer expectations. You know, the customers, they expect us to make this change, but they expect us to do it in a way that does not affect their bill and does not affect their reliability. And in fact, they want the bills to go down and the reliability to go up. All of this is happening at the same time. And this is our challenge, and we're excited about it at Duke Energy. We're embracing it, and we're working to get there. And I'll conclude there, Mr. Wilhite.
All right.
I think we met in 1989. I was like 4.
Okay.
I think he was 20.
So it's actually 5 decades. Oh, my gosh.
It is.
Thank you for that, Jay.
Welcome.
Alec, can you hear me? Good morning, Alec. You sound like you're muted, which is an oxymoron.
Look like.
Can we unmute Alec so we can hear him?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me? Rob?
We still can't hear you, Alec. I don't know why.
Hear you. Can you hear me?
Is it on our end?
Can you hear me? Rob? Are you there?
Oh,
Yes,
there
we
go.
can hear you now, Alec. Thank you. Alec, welcome. Glad to have you here. We're now going to move from one of the largest energy and oldest energy companies in the U.S. to one of the largest financial institutions and one of the oldest financial institutions. I believe J.P. Morgan can trace its roots back more than 200 years, if I'm correct on that, Alec. And So welcome. We appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Rob. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your partnership. My name is Alex Saltykov. I am Global Head of Sustainability and Energy for JP Morgan Chase. JPMC has rather very large real estate portfolio. It's approximately 7,000 buildings in 70 countries, approximately 2 million megawatt hours energy footprint, and overall spend of approximately $300 million in energy globally. And we house 250,000 employees across the entire globe. We made three large commitments over the past years. First is to rely 100% on renewable energy by end of last year, which we have achieved. Second one is to become carbon neutral. We also have achieved that. And third one, the hardest one, is to remove 40% of carbon footprint from our global portfolio by end of this decade without actually selling 40% of the portfolio. That being said, we have put together a rather very comprehensive plan that addresses on-site generation, off-site generation, looking into hydrogen, looking into resiliency, expanding our battery storage, looking into non-lithium ion solutions like zinc bromide, for example, looking into fuel cells, artificial intelligence, blockchain-based tracking, etc., etc. And so far, we made some significant progress. We recently issued a few public announcements that we're tracking every single green electron in New York. We just repeated the same structure in UK, linking it to cryptographically protected ledger of blockchain. We launched one of the largest RFPs when it comes to on-site generation, and our colleagues at Black & Veatch are very well aware of it, and they're participating in it. And the list goes on and on and on, because we are of a view that carbon is no longer risk, it's actual liability, especially when it comes to asset owners and managers. And also resilience is going to come into focus more and more, and therefore the exercise of de-risking needs to take place, and specific practices need to be developed, and those practices need to make commercial and practical sense. Back to you, Rob.
And so we have one of the largest and oldest utility firms, one of the largest and oldest commercial enterprises. But is that enough? We now need to talk about the technology side of this industry. And so, Eric, it's good to have you on the panel. You and I go back more than a decade. Your company's not quite as old as these other two, but you are using some extremely common and old elements from the earth to create an innovative technology that will fill a niche here. In fact, first of all, I need to congratulate Eric. His company, ESS Inc., went public 2 months ago. I believe it was back in October. Eric has been on a number of interviews, and in fact, he was on CNBC recently, and I'll paraphrase your quote, if I may, Eric, where you talk about energy storage as kind of the holy grail when it comes to 24/7, 365 days a year decarbonization. And if we're going to achieve that level of decarbonization, 100%, then energy storage is going to play a critical role. And in particular, it's long duration energy storage that becomes the missing link in all of that. So I love to get the holy grail and missing link in the same sentence.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
Eric,
Thanks for having me. I think
great setup for you.
I've worked, I feel most of the time like I'm the oldest guy in the room, so thanks for having me here, because I think I've only been doing this for 30 years. So, and I've had a chance to work really across this kind of nexus of technologies coming into the energy transition through smart grids, big data, analytics, customer engagement. And through that time, I know some folks from EPRI are here. I remember we gave a talk at the EPRI Summer Seminar in 2004 and said, you know, this is awesome. We might hit 5% renewable penetration in the next 5 years. And people were excited. And even then, people said, but what's going to happen when we really have a lot? What's going to happen when we're relying on inherently intermittent resources to provide the system? And people then knew, hey, we're going to need energy storage to do it. So I want to put some groundbreaking customer research here, surprise announcement. We've talked to customers and we said, what do you want out of the electricity system? And they'd say, electricity, please. When we throw the switch, we'd like it to come on, right? And so what ESS is working on is a pretty tricky electrochemistry project where we take iron, salt, and water, and we create a green sustainable battery that stores energy for that kind of 4 to 24 hour period, the time period that lithium kind of runs out of its useful life. In fairness, there are other people working on a different problem around seasonal storage, which is kind of 150-hour plus batteries, which you're not going to probably use very often, but you're going to be pretty glad you have when you have them. We were part of a group called the Long Duration Energy Storage Council that just came out with a big, we think, kind of groundbreaking report with McKinsey, where the projection is somewhere between 85 and 140 terawatt hours of long-duration storage required to meet the energy transition. That sounds like one of those ridiculously large numbers that people who write reports come up with, except for it represents only 10% of the electricity generated. And when you think of it that way, when you think about, could you imagine you have to take 10% of the electricity that we generate, again, through renewable, green, distributed largely processes, on a global basis, and we're going to, do you think we might need to store 10% of that to make the transition happen? It sounds pretty reasonable there. So what our company's working on is a little different. We don't use any rare earth minerals. We build in the United States of America. There is, on the toxicity scale, we're 000. And it's a 98% recyclable device at the end of a 20-year life. So we think that's the kind of formula that we need to be targeting. The only thing I would say in reference to some of the earlier panels, just to kick it off, and it was kind of referred to a little bit, but you had to be listening really closely, is we're making good progress, right? We're talking about putting megawatts of things on our way to gigawatts. We're talking about billions of dollars of investment. But I think we have to check ourselves because the number has to start with a T, not a B. There is no billions of dollars of investment that gets us anywhere close to what John Rhodes threw out of totally decarbonized by 2035. And hey, round it to 2045, it doesn't matter. The amount of work that has to get done is at a different scale. And so I'll share this and then I'll stop. Because when I'm in panels like this, people say, well, we're trying to decarbonize the energy system. Like that's a static thing, the energy system. And I say, yeah, sure, but we're going to electrify everything, right? Transportation and buildings, we're getting rid of natural gas, we're going to make everything electric. And then we've got about 800 million people around the planet who do not have access to electricity on the grid, so we're going to take care of them. And then we have 2.3 billion people who don't have access to clean cooking fuel, so we're going to fix that problem along the way. And oh, by the way, the population is going to grow to about 9 billion people in the time frame we're talking about. When you add that up, that is an electricity system that is 2.5 times the size of the global electricity system today. And we're going to do it all with no carbon.
Daunting task. Thank you, Eric. So let me ask this first question to maybe start with you, Eric. You're developing solutions that are addressing both decarbonization and resiliency. How do we reconcile those benefits? How do we reconcile the investments we need to make in both aspects to be able to scale up to the magnitude that you suggest? Eric, maybe we'll start with you and go to Alec and Jay.
Well, I think you've heard a couple of people refer to it, and Jay mentioned it a little bit before. I think the way we do that is we don't think about taking the incumbent system as it exists today and tweaking it. This intervention has to be the time where we take a step back and say, if we were going to design it today, how would we design it? And I think that from our standpoint, thinking about storage, you take distributed resources and storage, whether that's done at a utility grid scale, or as Alex is doing out at a commercial scale, we build a product that serves both markets. So we do front of the meter and behind the meter. And what we find is that if you do it right in examples like Alex's, you actually end up with a carbon-free, lower cost, more resilient system. Now that's a micro thing. It's at a building. It's at an office, at a bank branch. But you take that same thinking and you expand it out to microgrids, to neighborhoods, and there's no reason why we have to compromise that. I'll put this out for consideration. People, I know we've mostly focused on the US here. People probably know that the most reliable grid on Earth is in Singapore. Hong Kong debates that. Singapore is actually better. Singapore has come out and said they're going to transition to a 100% decarbonized grid. And they are going to improve reliability through the process. Now, you got to look at the Safety scores in Singapore to get a laugh out of that. The average Singaporean will not experience a power outage in their life. It's less power outage than lifespan. And so they've declared, they've said, we will not compromise reliability and resiliency as we transition to zero carbon. So it'll be a great, interesting example of how you kind of crank down the mechanics. And the first thing they've done, which we don't see a lot of here, but it warms the heart of a battery guy, is they're putting PPA requests out for 100% firm-shaped renewable product, right? The idea that you could build solar, you could build wind, and you'll sell it onto the grid whenever it happens to be available, they've offloaded the burden to the developer and said, just give me a firm product. And so, by the way, people lining up at the door to bid that in.
Hey, Alec, you alluded to this in some of your opening remarks, but your company is very much focused. You are very much focused on reconciling those investments between resiliency and decarbonization. Can you speak more to what you're doing with JP Morgan?
Of course. We launched one of the largest on-site solar deployment in C&I world, but we also realized that it's just simply not going far enough. If we're going to achieve our goals, specifically when it comes to resiliency, battery storage on-site is a must. Maximizing on-site solar generation is a must. And we also came to realization that there is a gap that will be left, and that specifically could potentially be covered by a combination of two things. One is on-site fuel cells coupled with either biogas or green hydrogen supply. I know that right now it does not exist, but it does not mean it will not exist in 5 or 7 years. That being said, I'm sure some of you know that not electric distribution, but gas distribution network is typically remains operational during electricity outages. Not particular case in Texas this winter, however, nonetheless, it's still the case nationwide, as has been proven multiple times in Florida. So that's definitely of interest to us because quite often resiliency matters, especially in the middle of blackouts. Simultaneously, stabilization of electric grid and stabilization of ability to deliver services to clients matters as well. And combining several solutions, that's the only option that we could think of, or at least based on available technologies. Yes, battery storage is important, but it's only one piece. Yes, solar is important, but it's only one piece. At the same time, we also have learned that deployment of conventional tier 1 solar panels is not going to be sufficient enough. We need to go a little bit outside of normal sandbox of comfort and set technologies that provide ultra lightweight solar panels, sometimes flexible panels, because quite often roofs just simply cannot handle the weight of the racking system, or the shape of the roof or material of the roof just simply not supporting conventional applications. So we're looking for combinations that make commercial sense, but also resiliency sense and also practicality when it comes to deployment and maintenance of those things. Are there solutions off the shelf as they are? Yes. But the challenge is we have deployed predominant majority of them. There are very, very few left that we actually would be willing to touch at this point. Therefore, we're focusing on things that are going a little bit beyond conventional horizon. Namely, it's hydrogen, namely, it's ultra lightweight solar panels, small scale fuel cell up to 25 kW range, and battery storage, preferably non-lithium. Back to you, Rob.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Alec. So, Jay, from a utility perspective, your company and many other utilities are getting pressure from multiple stakeholders when it comes to not just to decarbonization investments, but resiliency as well. How does a company like Duke Energy, how do you reconcile these two aims for investment?
Great question, Rob, and appreciate the other two panelists. Those perspectives are awesome, and they help us. I'm an engineer. I'll respond as an engineer. This is a step-by-step process. First thing I would say is, as we decarbonize, the reliability of the system and resiliency of the system is not optional. So it's not really even in the cards to allow reliability to degrade. And in one of our states, we've actually have a bill that was passed recently, happens to be North Carolina, where we are working on a plan to go to 70% carbon reduction by 2030 with no degradation in reliability. So that plan is underway now. So just take it as sort of axiom that reliability has to stay. Step-by-step process. First thing you have to do is you have to get the renewable resources in place, whether that's offshore wind, whether that's solar. Sounds easy, sometimes not. Land is valuable, okay? And flat land that faces the right direction, right, all these type of things, really important when it comes to increasing solar. So first thing you have to do is you got to grow that renewable resource that enables you to retire some of the fossil plants. Next thing you have to do is you have to address transmission. We heard some folks talk about the bulk electric system a little bit earlier. That's the transmission system, 100 kV and above. It doesn't go to the right spots right now. We need to address that. We have some constraints in the system already today when it comes to renewable energy. So you got to work on the transmission system, get it to the right spots. Sometimes we can leverage what we have. Sometimes we need to upgrade. Sometimes we need to build new. It takes a long time to site a new transmission line. Very difficult to do so. So got to get the resources in place, address the transmission. Then you have to put in storage. Our technology, because storage is what balances the system. Our renewable resources are only available, they're intermittent. They're available depending on the type and the location, maybe 25 to 40% of the time. And so you have to have the ability to store the energy when it's in excess and use it when you need it. This is system balancing, absolutely critical. Today, we use largely lithium-ion batteries to do so. They're pretty good technology, around 2 to 4 hour duration. We need some long duration storage. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but either way, right now, there's many applications for 1 hour, 2 hour, sometimes 15 minutes of balancing the system. As we get more and more renewables on and less fossil, that need goes longer. So we've done, you got to build the stuff, you got to build the transmission, you got to build a way to store it. Okay, these are all very important. Now, we need to leverage what we have on the customer side. The system in the past was largely based on whatever the load is, the generation is going to match it. And then we built this for 100 years, 150 years. A little different now. We need to think about matching the load to the available generation. This is a new paradigm. We need more customer participation, the ability to control load as we go, the ability to leverage on-site renewable resources when needed. Again, this is, to me, it all comes to shaping the load to the available source. That's another critical piece. And we can do that sometimes by something as simple as raising or lowering the voltage. And we do this all the time to help manage our system. So that's sort of the bulk electric system piece that you need to do step by step. It's easy to talk about it. It's much more challenging to implement it, but that's what we do. That's why we're here. And we're excited to be working on that. Then you have what a lot of people consider the traditional reliability metrics, let's say, of the T&D system. That also needs to be addressed, and it's critical. But initially, though, we're going to need to get the bulk electric system right and be able to perform that. So there's a lot of focus there, and with very good reason.
So, Jay, you showed a photo earlier of a flooded substation. I think, was that the one in eastern North Carolina, by any chance? Because I've seen you present on that before.
We had more than one.
You've had multiple
yeah.
substations. So
those are all addressed now, by the way. We've climate proof those.
So my
locations.
question is, you have to make pretty quick decisions on either elevating those substations, building barriers,
Yeah.
doing some type of mitigation to make them more resilient to the system. And how do you think about those investments from a decarbonization perspective? How do we sync together those kind of investments? Does that come into play when you think about making those kind of resiliency type investments from a utility perspective?
Yeah, it does. I think what oftentimes people believe that there's, okay, something that we do to harden the system against storm damage is disparate from something that we do to, say, add hosting capacity to the system. And adding hosting capacity to the system means we have more room for two-way power flow. Two-way power flow is the system was built one way, the wire gets smaller as it goes down to your house. We're updating our system now, and many utilities are, to be more of a two-way flow system, to where, particularly at the what we call circuits or feeder level, and I'd love to get on a board and draw a diagram, but I won't. You'll be spared that. But we have a way to backfeed those now, where we can sort of do this two-way flow model that we're talking about. It improves reliability today, which means better resiliency for customers, but also prepares the grid for the growth in renewable energy at the local level. And that growth at the local level is going to happen. It's important. And we need to be able to leverage it because we need really every tool in the tool bag, when it comes to, decarbonizing. Now, the flooded substation example, that's also a good example. If we are receiving, now remember, it's not a one-way model anymore, it's a two-way model. So if we do have energy that is coming into that substation, let's say from a nearby solar facility, and that substation is damaged, we just lost a source. In the past, we've lost the ability to serve customers, which we hate, and we're doing everything we can to get back on. But now losing a source makes that harder. Now, think about this. Again, all this stuff is related. You now have an electric vehicle at your home, and your power's been out for 4 days. Are you still able to go to work? Have you been able to take people to the hospital that are ill? Can you go get water because the well at your rural location runs on electricity and doesn't work? Reliability, resiliency of the distribution system, the wires that run through your neighborhoods, takes on a whole new meaning when we get into the significant amount of electrification that is coming for us. So it's very related, let alone rooftop solar installations do not like momentary interruptions. So they don't operate often the way you think they will. They're designed to automatically disconnect so we don't backfeed the system in an outage. So, they're very, very related and will only become more so.
So thanks, Jay. Let me turn to you again, Alec, because you and I have talked about the fact that the utilities can only make so many investments on their own, and it's going to have an impact, no doubt about it, but yet commercial customers are still seeing gaps in terms of our decarbonization objectives and what we're trying to achieve in resiliency. Can you speak more to how commercial customers such as JP Morgan Chase are helping to fill those gaps that we're seeing?
Of course. From our perspective, we like it or we don't. We are currently living in the age of carbon tax. And carbon tax is going to be ubiquitous. It's coming from Europe, but also in some of the major cities, namely Local Law 97 in New York City, and recently Boston has adopted something like that. That is having an impact. Typically, I use the following example. Imagine that you own 2 buildings in Midtown Manhattan, and Local Law 97 stipulates that as long as you're above certain threshold, you will be subjected to $268 per metric ton of CO2 fine. That being said, imagine that you have 2 buildings that as soon as Local Law 97 kicks in, you're subjected to, let's say, $3.5 million in fines. And full force of the law, that would be $10 million. What happens from pure perspective of commercial customer or asset manager? It means that your operating expense just went up by 10, your net operating income went down by 10, and if you take very standard, straightforward valuation equation of 5% cap rate, these 2 buildings just lost over $100 million in value today. If you are to sell it today, somebody's going to catch up to it, and they're going to discount it by $200 million combined. I would say that's a significant sum of money. Multiply that by entire Manhattan. Multiply that by Manhattan plus or New York City plus Boston. And I'm pretty sure somebody like San Francisco and Chicago are going to follow. Europe is going to impose continent-wide carbon tax designed to approximately erode anywhere between 20 to 40% of large companies' margins. What do you do with that? On the scale that we're discussing right now, we're talking about tens of trillions of dollars. Somebody has to react. We have clients, we advise clients, we have multiple groups inside the firm that advise clients. Part of my role is to think a little bit further, kind of to crawl out of conventional comfort zone of a sandbox so far that we don't even know where the sandbox is at the moment. Because if somebody does not go that far, somebody just simply is going to lose that particular edge. And I'm hoping that Rob will be able to attest we were pretty adventurous when it comes to our ideas and the spectrum of things that we're looking at. Because it's okay to fail as long as you think far enough, as long as you think broadly enough, and as long as you find the right conclusion at the end of the day, even if you fail 7 times out of 10, that serves the clients, that serves the firm, that eventually serves the economy, because if leaders lead, others will have easier path to follow. Back to you, Rob.
Thank you, Alec. And for those of you who are not familiar with what Alec is referring to as Local Law 97, which is effective January 1st, 24 in New York City, take a look at it. That's going to be a game changer in the industry in terms of decarbonization and in terms of all the investments we're talking about here. And so you've heard more of the utility perspective. There are gaps that commercial customers are looking to fill, such as JP Morgan Chase. But tell me, Eric, from a technology company perspective, what are the remaining gaps that still need to be filled? I mean, if you think about the innovation and the technology drivers that we need to be able to meet some of these objectives, where does a company like ESS Inc. come into play in some of these?
Yeah. Well, we think, as we said, we think long duration storage is one of those key missing things. Good news, a lot of people working on it and some real progress. These are commercially available products you can buy, they work, so you don't have to undertake the R&D process that maybe you would have 10 years ago to get there. I've contended we have 80% of the technologies we need to decarbonize the system. The last 20% is going to be a little tougher. I read some stuff published by EEI where somebody contended 75%, so we'll call that close enough. We're in the ballpark. So I would say that we should, as we're thinking about the overall system, let's focus on the 75% we know how to do today and ensure that the rulemaking is in place to facilitate getting those things done. Because I do think that there are still legacy regulatory issues, legacy interconnect issues that hold us back from getting there, because people don't know how the new technology plays in the old rules. So let's do that. In parallel, I'm all for the R&D investment, and there's some of grant monies and things that came in the infrastructure bill. There's some more that are coming to really go work on those things that are at the last edge. And it's going to be a portfolio of products. We get asked all the time, hey, long duration storage looks cool, but isn't hydrogen solves that problem, right? We're going to have green hydrogen everywhere, and green hydrogen will solve the need. Why do batteries? Isn't that harder? Now, so 2 things on my board. I have the chairman of the International Hydrogen Council and the CEO of one of the hottest hydrogen startups are on our board. So I don't think they would tell you there's no conflict. If you go to the Hydrogen Council, they would say hydrogen to grid is kind of their second lowest rated use case after industrial and transportation and other applications. But I'll be a little more glass half full. I think hydrogen will have play at the very edge of ensuring resiliency. It's the economics and the usefulness of going energy to hydrogen to energy. We're a long ways away from that being an effective approach, but that doesn't mean it won't play. So we used to have a joke in my Silver Spring Networks days. when people were talking about building smart grids, they say, well, what was the silver bullet? What was the thing that made it work and successful? And my longtime friend and partner, Raj, said, there is no silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. And so maybe that's a slightly politically incorrect analogy, but I think that as you and I were talking before the panel, Rob, we have to start to take on a portfolio approach, and as a vendor community interacting with market players like Duke, like JPM and others, we have to recognize that there's a giant portfolio of solutions that are going to have to come together, and that the biggest single challenge after the rulemaking is the orchestration across all of that portfolio.
Indeed. So I think the voice of God is telling me we have a few minutes remaining. What I'd like to do is get a couple of questions from the audience. Is there anything posted online as well that you could share, Richie?
I was saying that we actually have some questions online, but yes, you also have just a handful of minutes here before lunch. I'm going to respond to Jay, and this is anonymous, but maybe for Jay, but for everyone. You spoke about reliability, but what about resilience? How is all of the EVs that are coming onto the grid and into your visibility, how are they going to play in resilience? And that's a question for everyone, but Jay, maybe for you first.
Okay, so think about reliability as stopping something bad from happening in the first place. Think about resiliency as the ability to recover when something bad happens. So the current bulk electric system today is built to where we can withstand the loss, and this is a typical thing, we can withstand the loss of one major generation unit on the peak day, right? So literally the resiliency is built in. We call it N-1 contingency. Now, when you get to the level of that specific question about transportation, electrification, electric vehicles, that's a locational question, and it depends how we serve the location. I'm not talking about residential. We feel pretty confident because of managed charging and what it really takes to charge a residential vehicle, how simple that is, right? But when it comes to the big TE locations, transportation electrification, it's very locational. We need unique solutions, and we need time. I'll plead for this. Anybody that has a fleet electrification operation and you're going to go 100 trucks from ICE to electric, we need time. Let us know as quickly as possible so we can begin planning with you for that. Hope that helps.
Any additions? Alec, I don't know if
let's
you
go to
or Eric want to respond.
Well, on the topic of hydrogen, you and me have discussed it multiple times.
Hi, I'm Sue Gander with the World Resources Institute, and I direct a project which is aiming to convert the entire school bus fleet in the United States by 2030. So not maybe as much time as you want, but maybe following on to Richie's question. Love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that. We definitely advise school districts to, step number one, contact their utilities. But love to hear about how you think progress is going in terms of vehicle to grid and so forth. Thank you.
Great question. I'm like chomping at the bit to answer it. We actually have in multiple jurisdictions some rebates that are available for schools to transition from the internal combustion engines to electric buses. Now, electric buses are very expensive compared to buying a traditional, so maybe those rebates are not enough. We're looking into how we can move that forward. But the thing about buses, and this is really important, when you think of charging an electric vehicle, think of a equation that involves time. So think of a three-dimensional equation. So we can, if you take that into consideration, that we're typically not driving those at night, and quite often we're not driving them in the middle of the day, staggering that charging, managing it appropriately in conjunction with the utility will make that transition much easier. And again, I would urge all of the municipalities, all the school boards, anyone with buses, let's talk early, let's talk now, let's talk innovative. There's innovative solutions we can look at as well. If you happen to have a big canopy where you're parking these things, can we talk about putting something on top of that roof that's shiny and collects the sun, because that'll help us as well. So
And you're going to need
Yeah.
a giant battery there as well, because
Yes.
because what the first thing that happens, and you can talk about buses or you can talk about long haul trucking and the electrification of that fleet.
Yep.
And here's the very quick, all of this conversation of bouncing between resiliency, reliability and resiliency. The first step's bad news. You're going to call Duke up and they're going to say, oh my God, we could do it. It's a $20 million upgrade to the substation to get enough charging to do fast charging for transport there. You're going to say, well, that blows the economics of my project. I can't do that. And so you say, well, you could do it for a lot less money if you put a big battery in and you buffer it. The reason that we've got Alex on the phone is caching, right? You can buffer in the system and move that resiliency and reliability out to the edge. It still needs planning, so I'm not saying you shouldn't plan.
Right.
And then by the end of that conversation, those school buses are actually going to be a good news story to the resiliency story that Duke wants to tell, because if you had remote control and management of those devices, it actually goes from being a liability in the beginning, it kind of feels like a bad news, to being good news on the front at the end of the story, because that's another asset that can be out in the field. And so you can start to think about virtual power plants as the way you're going to control and manage these things. So, but it's complicated, right? Building combined cycle power plants, I'm sure for the people who built those, they thought it was kind of hard, but it's pretty simple to understand how the math works there. This is a lot harder.
It's distributed, it's dispersed, and it's the Internet of Things. Let's talk after. I'd like to get your card and, yeah, sure.
Thanks for the question. Richie, where are we? We got 2 minutes. I want to get some final statements from the panelists, if I could.
Absolutely. Maybe a rapid fire question if there's one that's quick.
Larry, up front.
Up front.
Great. Thank you, Larry Beckett, Portland General Electric. And Rob, I don't know if you realized it, but you brought together kind of the Westinghouse, Edison, looking at Eric as kind of the Tesla, but it was JP Morgan who actually settled some of the AC/DC issues and got us as utilities invested in the future.
Wow.
So it's kind of cool that you brought this group together. Quick question, it is that utilities are kind of hesitant to invest, not knowing if they're going to get returns, et cetera. We got regulatory issues, et cetera. But it's even more important is what are customers willing to pay? And so, Alec, as that customer, how do you think about the green and the investments? And your energy wallet is transitioning from a lot more oil, gas into electric. How can you comment on that? How you as a customer feel about it?
Recently, we were performing market scan just to see how our peers are thinking, and the chemical was one very interesting by paper. Morgan Stanley published what they call Hydrogen Handbook, and if you look at that, you realize in their view, by 2050, I would say probably 90+% of everything transportation is going to be either EV or it's going to be on hydrogen. So that kind of made me thinking. If you would imagine the economic growth that the economy will sustain between now and then, if you would imagine population growth, as some of my colleagues here alluded, and you take an equivalent of everything hydrocarbons in kilojoules and you transition that into non-hydrocarbon, we're looking at probably something, I don't know, I don't think anybody knows, but off the top of my head, I would imagine 50 plus to $100 trillion probably type of transition. And to my recollection, at least based on what I've seen based on my college days, humanity went through such transition only 3 times before. This would be the 4th. I guess we're lucky to live during such times, but it also presents rather very interesting opportunity. I do believe that hydrogen is going to be key to solving this equation. I do believe that heavy trucking, heavy buses will go to hydrogen instead of batteries because of just simple weight of the batteries, nothing more than that. And I do believe that resiliency and redundancy in the electric grid is going to be paramount, and battery storage is going to be a gargantuan topic for the discussion. And some of our colleagues and clients, the development cycle right now represents about 75% everything related to battery storage. So we are in a very rapidly evolving situation and form. Nonetheless, from my personal perspective, it presents rather an amazing opportunity. I'll give you one example. Like we came across a company out of Germany called Quantron that's already delivering on trucks, and those trucks are running, and so there is hydrogen application and expansion across the board. So things are taking place, they're moving. The question is, are they moving fast enough or not? Well, that depends on your personal preference. However, from economic point of view, one way or the other, market always levelizes, market always has certain tolerances, but at the end of the day, commercially driven enterprises will prevail, and practicality of the matter also has to be met by commercial aspect to it, because it has to have certain monetary acumen to it. Back to you.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, thank you for that question. I will tell you that I always prioritize emails from Alec because he's on the front of the industry looking at new technologies and applications and solutions like the one he referenced in Germany. So it's great to see, a very innovative company like JP Morgan out there on the front line looking at ways to stretch our thinking in the industry. So with that, I think we're running short on time. We'll be able to transition to lunch. Any final comments? I'd like to give each of you just a quick couple of seconds if there's any final comments. I would, first of all, 5 years from now, I would like to get us back together on this stage again, and then let's reflect back on what we just talked about now, because the topics may change, but some of the investments will probably still be very similar in nature, and long duration storage will probably be even more common than it is today. Jay, any final comments, final thoughts?
Sure. So I look out in the audience, I see a lot of young people. I see some seasoned individuals. But what's really going to make this happen is the young people here that are learning this side of the business and are interested in the engineering side of the business, are passionate about the green energy transition. I'm glad to see you all here, and we need you. I'll tell you, we need you at Duke Energy. We're looking for that type of talent, and I'm sure Eric's going to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't work for Duke, come here.
But it's really important that we've got, that we transition this generationally, and I'm just thrilled to see that. I expect to be the youngest person in the room, other than Rob, and I'm not. So that made me very excited.
Well, I'll just quickly play off of that. Jim Rogers, who sadly passed away, was the CEO of Duke for a long time.
Yep.
Back in the early days of building smart grids out and the energy transition, always talked about building a cathedral. And the thing, if you study the great cathedrals of Europe, was that the people who started building them didn't live long enough to see them get finished. They took too long. They took hundreds of years to build.
Sorry, Rob.
Yeah,
very true.
So thanks, Rob, for coming to the party. No, so I think that my message would be, we need people, smart people, thinking about how the arc of this development is going to happen over the course of the next 20 years and 30 years and 50 years. But I feel sometimes when someone says we're going to get to decarbonization by 2040, 2045, 2050, that triggers, because we're human beings, that triggers that I've got time. I can take the 20s and we'll do the planning during the 20s and we'll execute 30s and 40s, right? I think it's just a natural way for our brains to think. I would tell you that I think we're massively behind.
Yep.
I think that in the best case scenario, we are not acting at a fraction, 20% would be generous, of the rate of change at which we need to move to come anywhere close to the slow end. And that's the 2050 end, not the 2035 end. It was great to hear the president's goal be put out there. I'm sorry, folks, 2035 is a pipe dream at the rate we're going right now. So we either have to decide that we can live with 2050 and then still know that we're behind, or we have to do something that fundamentally changes the trajectory of the path we're on.
Thank you, Eric. Alec, final word?
Completely agree with the comments of 2035 is a issue. I do believe that we need to move faster, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned that whatever we could have deployed off the shelf, we have deployed. But as you know, you work with us. Right now, we're deploying things that have never been done before, like tracking energy on blockchain, like with ClearTrace, with EDF, with Nextera, and with Brookfield. Sometimes somebody has to just simply climb out of their comfort zone and take risk. Luckily, JPMC has the depth and the balance sheet to do that. And so far, we've been reasonably successful. We made tremendous amount of mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes. And I would encourage the audience to think through that particular prism. If you have an opportunity and if you have enough bandwidth inside the organization, specifically engineering bandwidth and imagination, do take the risk, because quite often, even if you fail 9 times out of 10, the last trial actually might surprise you with the outcomes, just as we have experienced in the past. Back to you.
Thank you for joining us today. Eric, thank you. Jay, appreciate it. We're going to reassemble the band here in 5 years from now, and I look forward to our conversations then. And now, back over to the voice of God. Rishi?